And now it's time for the dumb question of the month. Here to answer this month's dumb question, James Patrick Holden.
Hello folks, this month's dumb question is one of those types that you really have to have a cement block for a skull to ask. It starts by noting that Jesus obviously commanded his disciples to evangelize Gentiles. So far so good. But then it does a triple dumbbell backflip over this passage, and it asks the really dumb question, why did the disciples here speak about Gentile salvation as if it were some unexpected shocking theological development that without special divine revelation they would never have guessed was part of the gospel? Well, the only thing really shocking here is the amount of stultifying ignorance that it takes to ask such a dumb question. What's really happening here is that the dumb questioner is classically confusing a question of what with a question of how. If you read about this whole issue as portrayed in Acts and Galatians, it was clear that Gentiles had a way to be saved and a reason to be evangelized. But some were arguing that in order to get there, those Gentiles had to first become Jews and undergo circumcision, just as they had when they converted to Judaism before the time of Jesus. In other words, it was a question of whether the path of salvation for Gentiles was more or less direct, not whether or not there was a path for them at all. Peter's vision made it clear that the answer was more direct. The animals in the sheet didn't have to be changed into kosher animals before Peter could eat them. Now, if you're really stupid like some people are, you might think there are worthwhile objections to this rather obvious answer. One really stupid objection is that Jesus didn't tell Peter and the rest all of this while he was on earth during his 3-year ministry. The only answer needed to this is, so what? It's not like it was actually needed any earlier. There were almost no Gentiles to evangelize in Judea, and those that were there were mostly Romans who didn't care what a bunch of backwards peasants like Jesus and Peter thought. Not to mention they still didn't speak the language. Besides that, the best way to make a lesson stick is when the crisis of application is imminent. Presenting those points years or even weeks before they became applicable would have been an invitation to forget them and have to repeat the lesson later. Either way, it's an objection of nitpicking idiocy, not of substance. A second equally moronic objection is to misread and twist Acts 11:18 into being the church being amazed that Gentiles could be saved at all. That's monumentally stupid in good measure because I've already answered it. But I'll explain again for the sake of those whose brains aren't sufficiently powered to grasp the concept. There never was any issue even in pre-Christian Judaism over whether Gentiles could be saved. After all, Abraham was officially a Gentile until he signed up for God's covenant. And while there wasn't a widespread program of evangelism to recruit new Jewish converts, there was definitely a path whereby Gentiles were able to join up. So no, Acts 11:18 isn't about church people acknowledging a new revelation. And if you're really too stupid to get this, go back to Acts 11:1 and note what the original objection was. It was that Peter had eaten with men who were uncircumcised, that is, ritually impure. Not that he had eaten with men who could never hope to be saved. In light of that, note carefully that the response in 11:18 is that Gentiles had been granted a way to be saved. The thought being that once they were circumcised, they were Jews, not Gentiles. That's the two-step process I referred to. Now, a related question here is whether the fact that some early Christians only preached to Jews indicates an anti-Gentile sentiment. Well, no, that's an even stupider idea. The simple fact is that most of the apostles spoke only Aramaic or Hebrew, languages their fellow Jews understood. It would take a cosmopolitan polyglot like Paul to preach to the Gentiles. Some anti-Gentile sentiment may have existed, but if it did, that wasn't why most of the disciples wouldn't preach to Gentiles. After this, there's a few miscellaneous really dumb objections that a less informed mind might come up with. They're so dumb, in fact, that they should probably be put to some appropriate music and attached to a laugh track rather than explained verbally. So let's go ahead and do that. So there you go. There's no need to resort to idiotic speculations like the Great Commission was added as a textual corruption, or to asinine accusations like that the apostles were disobedient to the Great Commission. That's the kind of answer simple minds strive for. Like, yeah, see what I mean? See you next time.